Hello, everybody, and welcome to CaGBC's first in a series of Emerging Green Professionals Mentor Series. My name is Jennifer, and I will be your host for today's session. Your presenter for today is Alex Blue. Alex is a Principal and Building Energy Specialist with the Building Performance Analysis Group of Morrison Hershfield in Vancouver. She has been involved with commercial, multi-unit residential, and institutional projects across Canada and the United States. She is also involved in energy modeling and green building communities and is one of the founding members of the International Building Performance Simulation Association, Canada BC Chapter. Alex has taught sustainability courses through a higher education institution, and she is also one of CaGBC's instructors for their 7-course Lead Strategic Practices program. This program has a focus on students and recent graduates who are interested in entering or advancing their career in the green building industry. Alex, anything to add before we jump into some questions?
Thanks, Jennifer. Before we get into how I got where I am and what I do, I wanted to talk a little bit about what it is that I actually do on a day-to-day basis. So what I do, my job is as a building energy consultant. So I do building energy modeling. We use Energy Plus. That's a question that folks always ask. So that sort of means that we figure out how much energy a building is going to use using computer software programs. And we make modifications and we try to figure out how we can prioritize potential design measures for better energy performance in a building. And then we do things like compliance. So for example, how many LEED points are you going to get for your EAC1 LEED points? And then we also do some other related things, so things like energy audits of buildings. So existing buildings, we can go in and figure out where the energy is going and figure out how to reduce that and how to prioritize how to reduce that energy use. And we do some calibrated modeling as well. So again, similar to energy audits, that would be for existing buildings. Figure out using an energy model how much energy we expected the building to use and how much it is actually using. That's sort of the what I get paid to do part of this. So I am a building energy modeler. I use that software. I go in and do all of those sort of optimization exercises and compliance exercises. The other part of building energy consultant is the consultant part. And so I wanted to just touch on that because I don't know how many of you out there are consultants or might end up becoming consultants. So consultant, we get hired to provide a particular service on a bunch of different projects. So this week I'm working on a hospital, I'm working on a data center, I'm working on a police station, a fire station, and a couple of multi-unit residential buildings in a couple of different provinces. So we get brought in to do all of those things that I talked about earlier, right? Figure out how much energy we're going to use, figure out our EAC1 points, try to help optimize some of the design measures that we're putting in to save energy. And so we get brought in on all of these different projects to do that one particular task and to answer questions relating to energy. I think that that's fantastic. We'll go into a little bit more detail, I'm sure, as we start moving. But I really like consulting because we get to see a lot of these different projects, a lot of different locations. You know, we don't design a hospital the same way that we design a fire station, for example. And so there are all these different new and exciting problems to solve. So I just wanted to add that so that you guys can kind of understand what I do on a day-to-day basis.
That's fantastic, Alex. I think it's valuable to kind of provide that framework. We're going to go back in history to when all of this started. And folks, even though Alex is really interested in the energy side of things, a lot of what she's going to share goes beyond just energy. And so I think you'll be able to learn a lot from her, even if you're going in a different direction with your career. Those of you who are interested in energy, you'll learn a lot from her simply because she has that background. But there's also some basics in regards to how she got started and things along those lines. So let's jump right in, Alex. When and how did you first become interested in sustainable building?
Sure. So I did my undergrad in mechanical engineering. I was in Calgary at the time, so a lot of it was sort of oil patch related, and then basic mechanical engineering, pumps and fans and all that kind of stuff. And we did manage to get one class in on buildings, and we got to try some energy modeling. We used E4, if anyone remembers that. And we got to try looking at a bunch of different sort of sustainable design strategies more broadly, so not just energy, but in general, mechanical design for buildings, and we got to look at elements of envelope design for buildings. And I thought that was fascinating. It was totally different than a lot of what I'd done up to that point in my degree. And we're in buildings all the time. I thought that was so cool that we finally got to learn a little bit about how they work and how they're put together and why they are the way they are. So that course had a pretty heavy sustainability focus, and so I thought that was great. I decided that was what I would like to try to get into. And then I was also able to get a summer job from there at the university that we can talk a little bit more about in a bit. But that was a building sustainability related summer job, and that I really enjoyed it, so that really cemented my interest in sustainable buildings.
So you mentioned Calgary. Does that mean that you went to the University of Calgary?
I did, yeah. So I was speed skating actually at the time, and so Calgary was the place to be, and I did my undergrad in mechanical engineering there.
What made you decide on that program and that skill? I know there's the speed skating side of things, and obviously Calgary is well suited to that, but was there something specific that you were looking for in that program that just drew you in?
I was really good at math and less good at reading Kant. So I went with the engineering side of things, and jokes on me, I now spend a lot of my time, not so much reading Kant, but writing a lot of reports and spending a lot of time communicating with clients. So ended up doing quite a lot of that anyways, which is probably for the best. I enjoy it now.
Now, were there any groups or activities that you took part in while you were in school that you feel helped your career?
Yeah, so this is the part where I confess to having taken a 4-year degree that took me 6.5 years. So if anybody out there is maybe taking a little bit of extra time with things, it can work out. I spent the first 2 years of my degree speed skating and coaching quite a lot. So I was coaching a bunch of adult programs as well as children's programs, and then the last few years, I was running a volunteer program, so I was managing the program for the Students' Union, and I think that both of those were actually really worth the extra time, despite feeling a little bit slow when it took me quite that long, but I think those were both really worth the extra time. I got to learn how to talk to a lot of different people. I got to learn how to get my message across really fairly effectively anyways, and a lot about sort of general skills around being in the workplace, managing a program, managing a bunch of volunteers who didn't really have to be there. They kind of needed to want to do what you asked of them. And those kind of program management skills, email writing, all of those kinds of skills, I think have really served me well.
It kind of sounds like you actually went beyond project management skills and you also acquired some leadership skills.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Definitely key things as you're heading into the workforce to show that you're willing to take on new things, that you're willing to take on a leadership role, but also work as a group with people, so that's fantastic. As you were heading towards graduation, what actions did you take to find a job and or network so that you could get those job opportunities?
Sure. So I graduated not too long after that 2008 crash that you may recall. So that was a bit of a problem, graduating into that economy. So I actually ended up being able to, I'd done quite a lot of networking. I'd done attended a lot of the student groups. So we had a student ASHRAE chapter at our school. I got my lead GA during my first year working. So I was sort of working towards that as I was graduating. So I was kind of networking, showing up at student events and all that kind of thing, and I actually ended up lining up a job in in an engineering field, but in a totally separate portion of engineering, not in sustainable buildings at all, when I graduated, because I happened to know somebody who works there and they were looking for somebody junior mechanical engineer for a temporary position. So that was actually where I started, was really just through networking. I happened to know somebody in the right place at the right time.
Perfect. Now, Alex mentioned the GA, and what she's referring to, for those of you who don't know it, is the Lead Green Associate. And folks who want to show that they have knowledge of the LEED rating systems, this is the first credential that folks want to get. It's a Lead Green Associate, and we're starting to see more and more students coming out of school with that entry-level credential. Alex, would you agree that there is value in getting that before folks finish their program, or getting it now if they're interested in pursuing something in sustainability?
Yeah, I think so. It really shows a level of knowledge about the field and a sort of seriousness and commitment to being in that field.
Perfect. Now, how do you feel that that first job that you were talking about contributed to your career growth? What did you do to get recognized in that position?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to turn that a little bit and talk about my second job. So that first job, as I mentioned, was in engineering, but it wasn't in sustainable buildings. And so I was there for about a year and ended up moving across the country and looking for another job coming out of that. So still quite junior and trying to switch fields. And that took about 8 months after I moved. I had obviously been searching before I moved. So all in all, took nearly a year to find a job in the field that I actually wanted to be in, doing what I actually wanted to do. So again, hopefully kind of a note of hope for anyone who might be looking for a little while. Sometimes it does take time, unfortunately. I eventually ended up cold emailing a small sustainability consulting firm and asking if they were looking for somebody who had some fairly basic knowledge of energy modeling, and they said, yes, actually we are. Come on in. So I ended up working for a small, as I said, sustainability consulting firm and doing some of their energy modeling for them. So that was my first real job in the sustainability consulting and energy modeling field. And that one, I'll talk a little bit about, as you said, how it contributed to my career growth. So in that position, I was the only energy modeler in the firm, and then I had to get outside technical review, third-party review, and then I had a mentor outside of the firm as well. And so that helped a lot. I could ask my mentor sort of technical questions that I couldn't track down answers to. I had the technical reviews, so I knew that it all kind of came out right in the end once I'd done the work and gotten that review. So that contributed immensely to my career growth because I was kind of stuck doing the whole thing and trying to get it all right and trying to track down answers. And then I had the resources in place, just not at the next desk over, to make sure that it was all coming out correctly. So that I think really helped me to figure out what I was doing pretty quickly and how to make that work for me.
That's pretty interesting. There's two things that kind of stood out for me with what you just said. The first one was cold calling. Whenever I talk to people who are looking for jobs, they're nervous about that. You know, everybody is now moving towards I'm submitting my application online. They accept things online. What are your thoughts on cold calling? It sounds like this particular firm was receptive. Would you strongly recommend that? Don't be afraid to pick up the phone?
In that case, I actually cold emailed them, which I think helped get it to the right person and so that they could respond at the right time. So I think my recommendation from my experience would be less cold call and more cold email. I mean, I know firms do tend to post jobs online, and that would definitely be, it's clear that they're looking, so I would suggest that the success rate on that is going to be higher. But for me, it did happen to work, and certainly they had a need for it, and they had recognized that they had a need for it, but they hadn't set up a job posting yet, so I happened to get really lucky on that one.
Perfect.
Yeah.
The second thing you mentioned was a mentor. Now, how did you go about getting a mentor? Was it just somebody you happened to know, Was it a connection put you in touch with somebody else?
Yeah, so a connection was able to put me in touch with someone else, and he had actually done some technical review on one of the very early models that I did, and seemed receptive to working with me. And I had come to him, he was running a program, and so I had come to him with a couple of questions about the approach that I was planning to take, and he was receptive to providing those answers. And once I'd sort of gone through that particular program and that particular building, and sort of asked if he would be willing to take on more of a formal mentorship role, and he agreed to do that for me, which was very kind.
And, it's kind of interesting because when I look at CaGBC's involvement with you, I happened to see you for the first time at CaGBC's, we had a Zero Carbon Summit last year at our annual conference, and you were actually tagged by one of the head people at Morrison Hershfield to come and co-deliver a session with him. How did you manage to get that kind of recognition, Alex?
Yeah, so it's been a bit of a journey from there to here. That was about that first sustainability consulting firm was about 6 years ago. I started there, and then I've been at MH for 5 years now. I mean, I just took on a lot of stretch assignments. I was willing to be curious and to try to understand things, and I was willing to work on some of those extra projects, work on some of those extra stretch assignments, but also to take on things like presentations, things like training new staff, things like trying to go out and go to client meetings and learn to really communicate technical results to clients in a way that they could kind of latch on to and understand.
And the interesting thing from my perspective is, and I've seen the career growth of a variety of people, it is that willingness to take on new tasks and go outside of something that might not be quite in your comfort zone, but going a little further. And one of the interesting things is around that time, CaGBC was looking for an instructor for the Lead Strategic Practices program that I mentioned earlier. And it was kind of fate, because I remember, I didn't really know who Alex was, and then I saw her at the session. I thought, wow, she's really good. And so all of those little connections and all of those little things that you did leading up to that opened another opportunity for you going beyond just Morrison Hershfield, and just gave you that opportunity to do a little bit more, extending beyond just the energy modeling. So I think that's an interesting connection as well.
Definitely.
Now,
and being involved in things and saying yes to opportunities, even if they might be a little bit of a stretch or a little bit outside of your wheelhouse. If you think you can do them, or at least that's the approach that I've taken, then it'll open more doors.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you were also talking about those other soft skills. There's knowing the content relating to the career you want to be in. So it's definitely important that you know about energy and energy modeling and all of those connected things. But going beyond, taking on additional tasks without complaining, volunteering, continuing education is a really big thing in the sustainable industry. Once you get that lead credential, you need to maintain it. And the industry is growing so quickly that you need to stay on top of things. Finding a mentor, perfect opportunity. And most people who have, advanced in their career, they are looking to provide that guidance if you're kind enough, and, if you respect their time and genuinely listen to what they're saying. So I think that's fantastic. Now, Alex, what do you think is the next step in your career? Where do you see yourself going next?
I really enjoy doing what I do. Like I said, I get to work on a lot of different projects, a lot of different types of projects. There's all kinds of different, interesting, exciting problems to solve on a project basis. I really like getting to do some of the training and the teaching. So you had mentioned before teaching that Lead Strategic Practices program. I've really enjoyed getting to the opportunity to teach a couple of those modules. And then doing training for our internal groups and mentoring internally and externally. So I really, really enjoyed doing all of that. So I'm kind of hoping to just continue doing more of the same.
Which is fantastic. And for everybody, who's on today's session, you're starting out your career, but you should be looking at what Alex is doing and what some of the other mentors are doing. Whenever I've interviewed one of the instructors for our course, and I say, why are you interested in teaching a course on sustainability? And with almost without exception, everybody says, I'm passionate about the industry and I want other people to realize how important this is. I want to share my knowledge. And so I encourage everybody who's on here today, as you do advance, look at those opportunities to mentor other people who are coming in and sharing your own story. So I think that's great, Alex, that you do that. If you had to come up with your dream job, like this is the job, this is the pinnacle of what I'd like to do, what would it look like?
Like this, but with maybe a fewer evening and weekend emails. The other thing that I think is really interesting, we've gotten to do a little bit of work on this over the last year or so, and I think it's fascinating and interesting. And I've gotten involved in a couple of other committees and groups that are trying to look at the impacts of policy updates around energy in particular, and looking at what new policies might be brought in, trying to come up with ones that will really achieve the policy goals in question. So if your goal is carbon savings, then let's really target carbon savings, and let's really think about how to do that. If your goal is net zero energy, let's think about how to do that. And kind of translating those policy goals into actual workable energy modeling requirements or sustainability requirements that can then be enacted. I think that's a really interesting way to try to influence the industry, to try to get the right results that policymakers want, to kind of do that translation between the technical side of it and the policy side of it, and make sure that those are in sync. That's really interesting to me. So I'm hoping that we can continue to do that, and that I can continue to contribute to that conversation.
Which is great. And for those of you who are sitting at home and saying, oh, policy, I don't know how interesting that sounds. I know over the growth of my own career, policy suddenly starts sounding really interesting. And the more you kind of dive into it and see how policy influences action, there's a lot that can be done. So I think that's fantastic, Alex.
I think the longer you spend in this industry, the more you become a nerd about that kind of thing. So that's something for everyone to look forward to.
Now, if you could go back and talk to yourself when you had just graduated, what advice would you give to yourself?
When I graduated again, it was into that not so booming economy, and I ended up in a job that was not in my preferred field. It wasn't in sustainable buildings, and then I ended up on a job search for a little while after I moved. And so it took some time for me to get to where I wanted to be and where I knew I wanted to be. And so I would just say to myself, give it a minute, give it some time. It'll get there. There will be more opportunities, and get into this fantastic career eventually.
And would you also say that even though that first job wasn't exactly what you wanted, it was different, you still came out of that job with some solid skills, some, both, relating to energy as well as relating to soft skills, so that it wasn't a wasted job. It was, this is my job right now. It's not where I want to be ultimately, but I'm still going to take what I can from this job.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I definitely think I got a lot out of doing that job. I got to do a lot of site work on that one in particular, so I got to go out and dismantle pumps and stuff, and that was fantastic. It was a really different understanding of some of those components that we later applied to buildings. So I really got to see a different side of it, and it definitely was not wasted time in any sense.
Yeah, and for everybody who's out there, look at this as your toolkit. This is your toolkit of knowledge and skills. And you never know where your career, you can have your career plan and path and where you want to go. but it's also, there's an essence of this is unknown, and you never know when something's going to resonate with whoever's hiring you in the future. So take advantage of those skills and those educational opportunities and continue to grow yourself. Are there any other key lessons learned that you've experienced or that you know other people have experienced that you would want to share, those key lessons learned or advice?
Yeah, so I have a couple of small pieces of advice. One is be curious, so be willing to, and this is, I guess, for me too, right? Be willing to look something up. So this is one of the things that I think has served me really well. Be willing to ask a question and go out and figure out the answer. So whether that's asking someone at your office, asking someone in your network, it's not a bad excuse if you have a question to go and email someone that you think might know the answer, just to keep in contact. And really be genuinely curious to try to figure out what's going on and why it might be going on. The corollary to that is try to be right about it. So try to look into it enough that you eventually are comfortable with the answer, and that you really, and some questions might not be totally knowable, but then you have a future research paper to do, so that's great. But try to really look into something enough that you're comfortable figuring out that you figured it out. The other one is just how important writing and communicating well is. I spend a lot more of my day writing emails and reports and so on most days than I do, calculating custom chiller curves or what have you. And I think that's even more so for many lead consultants than for energy consultants. So really think about communicating and trying to write well. And if you're interested in things like presenting or training or things like that, trying to learn how to present well, that's a very separate skill. And for communicating well, that really involves a lot of thinking about what other people are going to get out of your message. So for me in a meeting, that's instead of saying you're only going to get 5 EAC1 points, not the 6 that you were looking for, full stop, sorry, versus coming in and knowing that they're going to be wanting that extra 1, having anticipated, well, what do we do to get that extra point, and coming in with an answer of here are the 3 options that you could do, which one makes sense for this project. So that's a lot more of a helpful answer. That's a lot more of a helpful communication.
And, as I'm a manager here at CaGBC, and I know for me, one of the things I love in the staff who report to me is, being able to identify potential challenges and letting me know, well, I think we can mitigate this challenge if we were to do this. And so it's just that forward thinking and being very active in what you're doing. And, just to add on to what Alex was saying about, being confident in doing the research and looking into things, I think that goes hand in hand with also being humble and being aware that there's a lot of folks out there with even more knowledge. And so, be confident in what you know and what you've researched, but also be open to those suggestions from people who have been in the industry for longer.
Definitely, and I would consider that part of the research, right? Trying to get that knowledge from others too.
Yeah, perfect. How did you get experienced in energy modeling? Did you take any courses, Alex?
Yeah, so I did take in my undergrad, we had one course about buildings, and we did get to do some modeling using E4 as part of that course. So I had built one full model in that, and then we did a little bit of playing with some little box models in there, but we had modeled the full building. So I came out of school having built one energy model. I played with it a little bit on my own and did some looking online for some examples of other buildings and other energy modeling programs, and kind of went through the tutorials for those energy modeling programs. There is a little bit more out there and available now for energy modeling introduction, but I think that's still a big problem is how to get that initial experience for those. I know many of my coworkers have done master's degrees and where they did much more energy modeling within their degree. So I really had to do a lot of learning it on the job in that first sustainability consulting job. I had only done a couple of models up to that point.
Okay, and a tag on to that is, how do you find optimum design using energy modeling?
Yeah, so we don't really aim for necessarily the single optimum design, right? We have to look at the needs of the project, what makes sense for the project, and what the impacts on other disciplines are. So what we would do is build a model of what we think is going to happen, right? So what we think the project is doing right now. And then we would look at a bunch of different ways that we could potentially make it better, or that we can, or that things that we should keep an eye on to make sure that it doesn't get worse. So we then go into a meeting with the other project team members, and they will say, for example, well, that example we had earlier, we're only getting 5 EAC1 points, we really need 6. How do we get that other one? And projects have limited budget is the trick. And so we have to, and not all energy efficiency measures will work for all projects. So there are, depending on the type of wall that you're looking at, there might be a practical limit to how thick you can make it, for example. So there may be a limit to the amount of insulation you could add. So you're making these trade-offs of, well, does it make more sense for this project to, maybe it's put in better windows versus put in better walls? And we only have the budget to do one of those two. If we could do both, if it turns out that we can do both, then great, everybody goes home happy. If it turns out that we can only do one, then the question is, which one makes a bigger difference for energy, and which one makes more sense in general for the project? And so that's how we kind of help to make those choices.
And I think that's really interesting, Alex, because you're actually touching on the integrated design process, aren't you?
Absolutely, yeah, definitely.
And that's one of the things, for those of you who don't know much about LEED or sustainable building, one of the big things that they recommend is, it's not just having the engineers work on their own and the architects work on their own. It's actually bringing the different elements of the project together. So the architect, the engineer, the interior designer, the consultant, maybe operations and maintenance. And in an instance, it could be, well, do we need a really big HVAC system? Or can we get, as Alex said, can we make the building more secure so it's not losing as much heat or energy, and then we can decrease the HVAC system, the size of the HVAC system. So that's one of the things that you need to be willing to do going forward, is work as part of a broader team. And it sounds like you're well versed in that, Alex.
Definitely, and I think that's one of the things that is really interesting about sustainability and about energy, is we get to be the ones to go in and kind of do that, and we need input from all of these different groups and all of these different designers, and we need to kind of get everybody working together, and I think that's, to me, that's really interesting.
Perfect. All right. Alex mentioned that she likes to move on toward policy. What are her planned future steps?
So I'm working on, my firm helps with some of the development of some of the new new policies in Canada, so including the BC STEP code, the new City of Vancouver codes, the new TGS standards in Toronto. And then I've been working on with IBPSA, which is the Building Performance Simulation group in Salt Lake City, Utah, to kind of look at moving some of their policies forward as well, and sat down with some of the Seattle and Washington folks as well to look at some different alternatives there. So so a lot of that is really just on a volunteer basis to try to get together as an industry and talk about direction and stuff like that, and then eventually we can put forward proposals to the actual legislators and to the policymakers and to the code technical committees to try to do that. So that's really just being involved with those groups and putting together those proposals is a big way. And then we have been, as a company, working on some of those step code and TGS and stuff, some of the modeling for that. So that's been exciting to be involved with.
And very interesting point, Alex, is that blend between building your knowledge but also getting involved. And I know a lot of the very successful folks that I've seen in the industry are those ones who are eager for new knowledge but also eager to get involved in a variety of ways. So it goes back to what you were saying about volunteering and building networks and getting connected. Those are all very important things in building your career.
Absolutely. Yes.
Great. So we will have another session in a couple of months, so keep your eyes open for the second in the EGP series. We hope that you folks will consider joining us for that one as well. And as for today, Alex, thank you. This was a really informative session. You gave some really good advice, and we appreciate you taking the time out of your day to help us out. Just reinforcing this volunteer thing, Alex is actually volunteering her time right now to take part in this session, and we really appreciate you doing that, Alex.
Thanks for having me.
Great. Have a wonderful day, everybody.